Hi everyone, this is Richard. In this video we are going to go over inheritance. Inheritance is one of those other fundamental concepts that we really have to understand. We touched upon them with regard to libraries, but didn't really call it by that name. So when we talked about libraries, we talked about import, export, we talked about a part of, but let's talk about it with respect to classes, and we'll apply that information that we learned, those concepts, to just programming in general. So not just with Dart, but any language that you may learn in the future. The classical example to explain inheritance is shapes. So we have a shape, which is basically, my opinion, is just the outside border of an object. So it could be a car, a chair, a circle, a rectangle, anything like that, okay? If it's two-dimensional, we kick out all of those three-dimensional objects, car, chair, and we say it's on a two-dimensional plane. A polygon is a closed form of straight lines. So instead of circles and blobs, now we have to have straight lines with angles on them, and so forth. Quadrilateral is a four-sided polygon. Notice that every heading here and every subheading and every subsequent one below it is basically the same thing as the thing above it, but it adds additional characteristics. Okay, so anything that's a two-dimensional that has a shape inherits from the superclass. So all shapes that are two-dimensional have characteristics. All two-dimensional shapes have the same characteristics as shapes in general. It just adds more on top of it. All polygons are two-dimensional shapes, right? So all polygons are two-dimensional shapes. So it inherits, it takes the characteristics of all two-dimensional shapes, which in turn takes all characteristics that they have an outside border of it. And then it adds some more characteristics. So it has all the characteristics of a two-dimensional shape, and it's a closed form of straight lines. All right? So that's the concept of inheritance. We get a class, we extend it, it inherits all of the characteristics, all of the methods, all of the variables. It gets all of those characteristics, and you can add your own. Okay, so the thing above the class, in this case, will be a superclass, and the thing below, the class below, will be called the subclass. So this is our superclass right here. Class cake, and here are our instance variables, right? So now we're going to go ahead and make a subclass that inherits from cake. All right, and Dart is what we call a single inheritance language. So you can only inherit from one language. From one superclass. So class, you can inherit there. You can have multiple types of cakes. So birthday cake, I don't know, cake, I don't know, dessert cake or something like that, a carrot cake. You can inherit the superclass, can have multiple subclasses, but the subclass can only have one superclass, okay? We use it with the keyword extends. So I'm going to say class wedding cake extends cake. So in other words, superclass, subclass inherits all of this, and it adds on top of it. The small figure on top of the cake, I don't know what that thing's called, but you know, the bride and groom thing. So you have to have that. It is optional in most cakes. Here you absolutely have to require it. And here, number of layers. I think most cakes are like a single layer, and wedding cake is what, minimum 5 layers? I don't know, something like that, okay? So let's take that and let's learn a little bit. So up here, I'm going to create the instance of the class. Wedding cake is the type. Variable name. I'm going to create a new instance of wedding cake, okay? So I'm going to say print wedding cake dot, and I have access to all of these variables even though they're not declared right here. Eggs. Oop, we kind of knocked it out there. So chicken, right there. We also have access to all the variables, instance variables at least, right here, with extends the small figure on top of the cake right here. And the value of that is true, because it's true right here. Okay, so that's what we do. And we could just keep going down the line, because many times when you create a when you create a class, you may see a class that's already there. And you don't really need to add this. This is nice and simple. You could just reprint this. But what if you had a class that had lots and lots of methods, instance variables, but you didn't want to mess with the class for one reason or the other? Maybe, for example, you needed that class and you wanted to add it, instead of just making it wedding cake, you wanted to make also birthday cake and fattening cake or something like that. So you wanted to keep the class there, but you wanted to extend it into multiple different types of classes. Maybe that's one reason. Maybe because you were just afraid to touch it. Just because the class looked really good, and I don't know, maybe it belonged to somebody else and you don't want to mess around with it too much. Whatever. But this is one way of extending the class itself. And that's an example of inheritance. Few other things. When you think about the type can also be cake as well. Okay? So you can actually have the type cake and it'll be wedding cake in and of itself. It'll give you a little bit of a mild error right here. It still will work, okay? Because you want to be as precise as you possibly can when the type, okay? So let's do number of layers. Again, it'll give you a mild error because it's no such getter, because it's basically saying, well, wait a minute, you're supposed to be using this right here, right? Because this is the type of cake, not wedding cake. But you're actually creating an object of wedding cake. It's not as precise. The best way I would say is that if you're going to make a type, you want to be as precise as possible. If you drew a rectangle and said, this is a parallelogram, you are not wrong. But at the same time, you should be as precise, as specific as possible. Say it's a rectangle, so that the Dart editor will help you along the way. Again, the more you help the editor, the more it's going to help you too. Okay, so. And we'll change that back there so that there's no errors any longer. All right, so this is inheritance. We do have to talk about a few other topics about it, and we'll do that in the future. Thank you.